Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Harvard India Conference. Welcome to this panel on the future of work in India. The topic of future of work is not just immensely important and urgent, but also close to home for many of us. In the last few years, we've seen technology and digitization transform businesses. With the COVID 19 pandemic, organizations and governments have been challenged to accelerate the pace of change and prepare the workforce for what lies ahead. Given this context, we're incredibly fortunate to share this room with a truly distinguished panel. Please join me in sending a warm welcome to our esteemed panelists. Ms. Nandita Gurjar, Independent Director and former Chief HR Officer at Infosys. Ms. Aruna Jayanti, Managing Director, Canada and Latin America for Capgemini. Mr. BP Bidappa, Global HR Vice President, Unilever. And Mr. Vikas Gupta, Managing Director and Partner for Talent at Deloitte Consulting. We're lucky to have Mr. Vikas as the moderator for the panel today. Before starting the session, I would like to quickly outline the model of the panel discussion. The session will start with 15 minutes of opening remarks from our moderator and all the panelists. This will be followed by 30 minutes of panel discussion facilitated by the moderator. In the end, we will have 15 minutes of audience Q&A where the moderator will bring up aggregated questions from the audience. So audience members, please do use the Q&A function that you see on your screen to post your questions. Also, please make sure to use the upvote or like function in the Q&A window. Questions that are upvoted the most will appear at the top of our list. Finally, please do tag us with hashtag ICH2021 when tweeting your favorite moments and insights from the event. Now, without further ado, requesting Vikas to kindly commence the panel.
Thank you, Shripriya, for that very thoughtful, insightful welcome and introductions to the entire panel. Really appreciate it. It's a very fascinating topic for me to moderate this session this morning. As I look at the leading daily, financial daily in India this morning, the cover page reads the headline almost like half of the page, and it says, India Inc. on comeback trail. Despite the lockdown, quarterly results show several companies have registered their best performance due to cost rationalization and higher demand. And it's very fascinating to read it, that even in this midst of pandemic, you read this kind of a headline on a leading financial times at one end. At the other end, as a student of management and a lifelong learner in me who's never studied future of work in a management course, I'm here to lead or moderate this panel with eminent leaders who have used their 100 years of work experience in leading their organizations through this change, both in India and globally. So like you, I'm equally curious to moderate this session, equally curious to learn from this group about future of work. To tee up this subject, I picked up a simple quote from Benjamin Franklin, who says, when you are finished changing, you are finished. So if you think about this particular quote and start to think about what history has it, that during times of disruption and stress, economy and society see some of the biggest and boldest changes and adoption of ways that could have been unimaginable earlier. The last 11 months have given us enough reasons to believe this. If you look at 5 macro trends for you to think about: age of work, life expectancy, pace of change, they all have gone up, 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 and up. If you think about half-life of skill at one end, or for that matter, attention spans of people, they all are on a decline, which essentially gives you a reason that you need to be changing at a pace which you could have never imagined earlier. As we look at organizations making point-in-time adjustments to their business models to hold their competitive edge, it is evident that these organizations have to restructure their work and support their workforce to stand to the challenges that may arise in the future. While conversations are centered around technological disruptions, the seeming paradox of finding ways to remain distinctly human in a technology-driven world is pivotal. As we all strive to stay resilient for future uncertainties, there are three attributes of purpose, potential, and perspectives that arise for organizations looking at creating value not just for themselves, but their workforce and the society. As leaders and organizations continue to move from survive to thrive, they have looked at these three P's to sift through competing priorities and focus on more pressing organizational and societal goals. So, with that as a backdrop, let me invite my first panelist, Nandita, to come in and give her perspectives on future of work. Nandita, over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Vikas. Pleasure to be here, and welcome to all the participants, which I see continually increasing. So I think if there ever was a time for organizations to really validate and redefine their purpose, the time is now. I think the last year, though it was not all good news, was one of a fantastic year for all organizations to really question all their models, their supply chain, their employee models, their business models, how will they interface with their customers, with their partners, and what the new business as usual will look like. One of the biggest paradigms which really got questioned and tested was the work from home. So I think the employees who really are the integral part of an organization really went through something dramatic, which is they had to continue to be productive and even more productive as a result, say 13% more productivity as a result of working from home, and shown marvelous success in sustaining the organization through a very difficult year. So kudos to everyone who are all participants of this. The other models which we got questioned were, are we really going to go on back to the old business as usual? Or are we going to change this and move to a hybrid model and slowly to a different future for our organizations? And I think we are right now in a transition to manage that. And I would request all leaders and all employees to really look at this as an opportunity to build and create a new future rather than to go back. I mean, the worst thing that organizations can do is to go back to the old business as usual, thereby losing an opportunity of creating a new future.
Thank you, Nandita, for those insightful, thoughtful insights and advice to our audiences as they think through future and what they can think about as they plan some of their strategies for moving forward. Let me bring in at this stage Aruna, who is not just leading the organization, our very large organization in India, but also globally, to bring in her perspectives on the future of work and listen into her insights. Aruna, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me? Hi, everybody. Good evening to those in the US and good morning to participants in India. I see broadly two trends that are defining the future of work. Okay, one, which is very visible and what we all talk about, is remote working. And clearly looking at the last 6 months, many organizations have now confirmed that it has really benefited them. And even otherwise, I see that this remote working world opens up a huge world of opportunities for everybody, for organizations, for individuals, for entrepreneurs. So I think there is a huge potential in what we see with the remote working. However, and I can give you many examples, okay, just to take a very simple, short one. Take a look at the talent pool. Okay? Earlier, we were restricted by who can we hire in a city, or if we, where we are located, or if not, go somewhere else, hire them, and then relocate them. But now, the whole sourcing model for talent has become more national, more global, right? You can hire anybody, anywhere, as long as they can work remotely. So that is a big change in paradigm, and the potential that it offers both organizations and individuals. Okay, and you can do so much more, so much with that opportunity, right? To go to semi-urban areas, to go to rural areas, to really look at talent and organizations in a completely different way. But what remote working does not do is to change the nature or the way that we do work. Essentially, all we are doing is taking what we're doing in the office and doing it somewhere else, right? And then, but that brings me to the second trend, which is around automation and digitization. And that is also, and both these together, truly, the remote working, automation, digitization are together really defining what the future of work looks like. So with automation, then you're saying, hey, look, is that piece of work really going to be done by a human, or can it be done by a bot? Right? So it's not just about taking work somewhere. We're also questioning whether the work itself is needed, or work itself is needed in a different shape or form, right? So which means that this leads to a huge question around, therefore, if this happens, what are the reskilling needs of organizations? How does the shape of work itself change, and what does it mean for an organization and for an individual, and how should they upscale, how should they redesign, how do organizations work in a different way? So I think both these, because just the remote working as well as the trends around automation and digitization are really defining what the future of work is like.
Awesome. So that's fantastic to hear that, because all you're saying is that opportunities are no more confined to 4 big metros or bigger cities, but they're spread across the country. And also for organizations to think about not just the old ways of looking at things or looking at work, but how can you think about newer ways of delivering that work with a combination of humans and technology altogether. Fantastic, Aruna. Let me move on to Dinesh here. Dinesh, you lead a very, very large organization, both here in India as well as based out of Europe. Would like to hear, what are you seeing from your vantage point about future of work, and how are you leading this transformation for your organization?
Thanks so much, Vikas. Thanks, Sripriya. Firstly, pleasure to be with all of you, and delighted to be part of this conference. Thank you for having us. I think if I look back, the last year has probably been one of the most challenging years that we've all faced in our lifetimes. Yeah? And I go back and reflect and think, what were 2 or 3 of the pivotal changes that probably will stay on, or the next 5 or 10 years, that helps us define the future of work or the future of the workplace in many senses for us. And there are 4 that I pick up, 2 from an organization perspective and 2 from an individual perspective. I think from an organization perspective, there are 2 fundamental shifts that have happened. Yeah? One, the first one is the world of everything. Yeah, everything is moving online. Organizations are moving from 5% of their business coming online to 30%, 40% of the business coming online. India as a country has 700 million people with internet reach, and 760 million people who have got smartphones. Yeah, 370 million people use social media. So the number of people who are actually accessible on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on all digital media actually tremendously impacts the space for impact for our organizations. And as Aruna said, as we go more and more internal to our country, to the hinterland, to rural and parts of the country with conventional media could not reach, the reach of digital media is super, super important. This also has impact in terms of the kind of products we make. Yeah, you can't be transporting water and air across the country. You need to have much more dense products, probably much more value density to make sure that you can reach your consumers with your products. And distribution reach is no longer a competitive advantage. And therefore, there is a whole new industry that is coming in terms of logistics, in terms of data analysts, in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of just companies that can, e-retail the 8 million or so or 10 million retailers in this country. So that's a pivotal change that's happened, and that's kind of going to influence the way work happens in the next few years. The second is really, we found at the start of our lockdown in India, a large number of migrant labor in our cities. 77% of India actually works in non-defined informal sector roles. Yeah? If you look at our organizations, we would typically employ between 5 and 10% of our people, whereas 90% of the people work in our ecosystem, in our suppliers, in our agencies, in our plantations, in farms that produce tomatoes and tea, and for our kind of companies. And you cannot win as an organization if the entire ecosystem doesn't win. And I think one of the things that the lockdown clearly taught us is that for India to win, the entire ecosystem must win. And it's not an organization or the people who you directly employ that you should be really concerned about only. So I think these are the two fundamental realizations that have happened from an organization perspective. From a people perspective, I think there are two. The home has changed nature completely. So what used to be home and office separately, that boundary line is blurred completely. And actually, the place that you thought was your sanctuary has now become your workplace. Yeah, we had a bit of discussion about whether we should have a natural background or the virtual background. I think these are questions that a lot of people worry about. I think about 46% of people actually feel in a study that IKEA did that home met their emotional needs in the last 1 year. Over half of people actually continue to want to work out of home because they think there is security, they think there's work-life balance, and they can manage the transition from work and life in a way that gives them a sense of peace, and they can make their priorities. Offices are happy because they find that 30% of office spaces are anyway not used. People are anyway traveling or working out of home at different points in time, and so excess capacity in office space can be released. So that's the third, which is the definition of home and how that impacts our work. And the fourth is, I think, something that's close to my heart, which is this whole piece on mental health. It's a silent epidemic that actually is creeping up on us, and with this data age and the home and work from home, it's creeping up even faster on us. The World Sleep Study recently said that 51% of Indians sleep between 11 and 1. Yeah, which is not the best time to sleep. And 1 in 5 people suffer from some form of mental, health or mental issues, which is a large number for a country like 1.4 billion. It's a second most impacted country from a mental illness perspective. So I think the increasing impact of our work on our mental health and the health of the nation, because this actually leads you to many more physical health issues, is something we need to watch out for. And I think all CHROs and CEOs across businesses take that fairly seriously. So I'm going to pause here and hand it back to you, Vikas.
Thank you, Dinesh, for setting up that wide spectrum of issues onto the table from your vantage point. And certainly for organizations, omni-channel, for e-education, or making people aware with digital trends, I think the UPI number of UPI transactions itself give us a very good insights of how India is adapting to digitization and aspects of centered around that. I think Aruna's comment, in addition, also answered some of these aspects of whether this automation will create more jobs or reduce jobs. So give us a little bit of sense, but we'll go more in depth into some of these issues as I take on additional questions to it. So at this stage, let me bring in Aruna, who spoke about reskilling. And if I truly look at two trends which are happening in and around us, whether it's to do with education as an industry, which is academic institutions also thinking about omni-channel delivery of education, or for that matter, the learning organizations within organizations also looking at omni-channel of delivery of learnings to keep their workforce up to date about the latest and greatest happening in the industry and prepare them for the work which is ahead of them. So Aruna, if I can ask you, how has remote working impacted productivity and performance of human capital from the position you sit in?
It has improved productivity for sure. And we did some research in Q3 of last year across 500 organizations to check what it was. And the majority of them, I think, if I remember right, 63% or so of them, it reported a definite increase in productivity around, let's say, on an average of about 18%, which is quite significant. And more important, they all said it is here to stay. And I think the reasons have been mentioned earlier, but to sum up, the primary reasons are avoiding the commute to work. And if you know Bangalore and Mumbai, 1.5 hour commute each way, you're saving it a minimum of 2 to 3 hours a day in that itself. So lack of commute. Then the flexibility of being able to work anytime during the day or at their convenience, to be able to do their household work and then to attend to work. And then the other reason is also, it's not a good reason. Okay, but one of the reasons is also that, especially last year, there was some sense of job insecurity for people, to say that, look, will the pandemic affect my job? It is going to go away. So there was also a sense, slightly, I would say, also the sense of insecurity, which got people to perhaps do a little bit more than normal. So I think these were the main reasons, but it worked. But as I said, that some organizations didn't get it, right? So 65% of it got it, but the others didn't. And where it didn't work was when they did not put the necessary infrastructure in place to make it happen. I mean, it's not just going to happen that you're working at the office, you go home and suddenly everything just works the same, right? So there had to be the right technology infrastructure in place. You had to put in collaboration tools such as this one or others to allow people to work together and collaborate as much as possible as they did in the office. So there are various, I don't think we'll have time to go into all of them, but there are strong reasons why it worked, and there are also some reasons where it did not work. But the sum total of it is that when you look at what worked and what didn't, it is definite that this is a sustainable model. Right? It will go forward. Okay, hopefully the job security concerns will go away, but the other and also the question that I saw with some of the people around burnout of with being always on, 24/7. So that should go away. So once we organize work, once we organize how it is done, and we organize and set it up for a distributed manner. So, we have to redesign work, redesign organizations for a distributed model. Then I think the productivity gains are sustainable and can be carried forward.
And you're so right, Aruna, in making that point. At one end, there is a fear for jobs being taken away. At the other end, the opportunities which are emerging and the numbers which I keep seeing in the report outs, which keep coming on our news dailies regularly, that hey, this organization has ramped up their hiring numbers for the year, will be high, double than what we did in earlier years. So it gives me a lot of confidence that as much as there is a fear, but if people are prepared for those jobs which are coming up, for sure there are umpteen opportunities, and there are a lot would be chasing them. Okay. So with that, let me transition back to Dinesh. And Dinesh, you lead an organization which is kind of a more global in nature from a transformation perspective. Your workforce is quite spread out, not just in office locations, but also into the fields, doing a lot of sales work and so on and so forth. So given your global role, as India emerges, my question to you is, given your global role, as India emerges from this post-pandemic world, what opportunities do you see emerging for our workforce?
Thanks, Vikas. So firstly, I don't lead the India business. I work in Unilever, and I'm based in India as well. I was part of the India leadership team till a couple of years back. I think, as we open up from the pandemic, there's a lot of worry, and I can see that in some of the questions as well. Will technology take away our jobs? And are we going to have to look at unemployment as a big issue? Yeah, I think not. I think there could be a blip and up and down as we move through phases, and a lot of companies have hunkered down to make sure that you don't reduce workforce, especially in the last few months. But I think this presents the opportunity for us to look at very different skill sets. One of the things that's obviously struck all of us, and with a sense of pride, is the place that India plays in the role of global vaccine manufacturing. And suddenly you realize 80% of vaccines globally are manufactured in this country, and that gives you a feeling of tremendous pride. And I think it also helps us focus on the things that India can be famous for. Yeah, India has got an incredibly educated workforce where we have 28% of our workforce is young, between 15 and 29 years of age. And we are also a very resilient population. Yeah, we're also a population that has worked in very, very different cultures, because to call India one country in many ways is actually a very difficult statement, because it's a combination of so many different cultures that people from India tend to have the versatility to work in very different cultures because they experience that on a day-to-day basis. I think the 4 or 5 areas that we can pick up that could expand our skill set. I mean, the first one is core manufacturing. We could actually be competitive in setting up very strong manufacturing hubs, like we have done in pharmacy or in vaccines, and that could be a big space for us to play in globally. I think the whole space of IT and data, and I know Aruna will have a lot more to say on this as well, but we are actually supply short in terms of data analysts, in terms of AI specialists, in terms of cloud computing. In every one of the fields that you go into, actually our skill set is much shorter than what the market needs. So that's a big space for us to occupy, not only from an India perspective, and this is not about saying India needs to be a hub, but India could be a talent hub for the world in this. Yeah. The third is, I think, clearly healthcare services. Yeah. Health tourism, in a sense, affordable, top-class healthcare is available in India that most other countries could only dream of. So I think rather than do a wide spectrum and say there are 100 different areas, I think we should focus our efforts on saying high-end manufacturing, high-end data and information technology, and top-end healthcare tourism. And you'll find that actually the world has a huge demand for all of this, which India can step up and fulfill. And not only will it fulfill India's needs, it will fulfill global needs. And our doctors in India have incredibly wider range of experiences than people in many other countries, just because of the range of issues and problems that they get to face with, whether it's illnesses or accidents or health-related issues. So I think our time has come. And we have a generation of a workforce that's very optimistic, very, very positive and very talented and skilled. So I think the future is bright.
Awesome. Dinesh, you bring in again very, very pertinent points of it. Just to add one more from my perspective, as I read through during the pandemic, when there was a lot of migrant laborers going back to their hometowns, the paper I read from Professor Rishikesh from IIM Bangalore calls out very clearly that why can't this migrant laborers who are moving from large cities to smaller cities can be used as trainers for helping people become digitally educated. So the opportunities galore. It's just about how we see them and how we take advantages of them. So with that, I'm kind of taking a segue into another question, and Nandita, this is one for you. How do you see HR policies and workforce strategies changing to create workplace environment that shapes superior employee experience and enable increased productivity, which Aruna spoke about?
So I think everyone would agree that one of the biggest impacts during the pandemic was on how employees had to work. So the work from home paradigm, which was tested by some industries earlier. I mean, it's not a new concept. Some tech industries have implemented work from homes, but in smaller doses and not an entire organization at all. So while this was amazingly managed during the pandemic without any precedence, I think it was done because it was a crisis mode and because it was short term. If this has to be implemented in a long term, organizations will have to ask whether they want the business as usual, the old business as usual model, whether they want a hybrid model, or they want to continue with the work from home model, allowing probably some employees to come in at different times. What HR will therefore need to do and have to play a big role is actually to create policies around this. And one of the first ones I would think would be to first start with listening posts, and understand what employees went through during the pandemic. Because it's all well to say, you work from home, the productivity was up, it was great. But if you look at some of the statistics, a lot of women, I think the 500,000 women, dropped out of the workforce, saying it was unmanageable to manage a home, children, and work. right? So this is extremely unfortunate, and we of course hope that children are back to schools, thereby, the women get back to work. But having said that, the stress on parents was very high to manage this. So understand from the employees as to what could be done better. Two is to define work times and break times, right? Because, I think everyone whom I was speaking to was saying we were working much, much longer hours, right? Than we did when we were in the office. Because at the office, you could stop the work and come back and not sort of carry your work home unless it was email. But in this case, there were very blurred lines between work and life. Redefining the trust at the workplace. I think one of the speakers brought this up, and one of the participants has asked this question and saying, how do you get this? This really is a management issue. How will you now manage your workforce, and how will you redefine trust at the workplace? Earlier, bringing them to office, making sure that they're within your sight, and then they are working, even if they're taking coffee breaks, you felt comfortable in that workplace, right? Now they're remote. You really have got very little idea of what they're doing. So you therefore will need to build different kind of goals and metrics to be able to assess their quality of work. And if they can manage that work within a shorter time, so be it, right? Instead of worrying about how many hours they're putting in. Creating the virtual water cooler. Because at the end of it, I think everyone who believes that work from home is a great idea misses the workplace because, of those conversations you had, with your peers and with your friends at the workplace. And suddenly now, the only conversations you are having is related to work, right? So creating those virtual water coolers, I think, is very important. Most of these things, by the way, exist in some form. It's not as if a new technology will have to be introduced. I know, in my previous organization, we had our own radio, we had our TV, we had something like a Facebook, we had something like a Twitter where, employees could have a conversation over. So, I think this would really need to get spread out, which basically means HR really has to get into tech and see how to use technology within the organization to make sure that the connectivity is as good as when they were working outside. Today, a lot of us are very comfortable messaging our friends, meeting them on Facebook instead of doing face to face, right? We survive with that. I mean, actually, we enjoy that. Similarly, organizations will enjoy these kind of technological meet places. You could meet anyone in the organization or not just your peers, and have a continued experience like that. I think one of the best things, and Aruna touched on this, for HR is now they can really look at their organization structure and ask the question and answer what millennials have been asking for the last few years, in saying, why are we having just one employee model, which means we need to come to work every day at the office for 8 to 10 hours, right? It's the millennial generation, and I'm sure other generations also, which would enjoy working for fewer hours, fewer months in a year, and the so-called gig economy will come alive, because you'll be able to tap skills at their rate, at their duration, and able to create an organization structure which actually allows such roles to sustain in the organization. So hiring people no longer has to have a boundary. Many a time we used to be restricted by hiring people of skills that we need because they were not ready to relocate to your office. Today, you don't need to worry about that. They could work from anywhere in the world, and you could have those employees be part of your organization. So I think some of these models and policies are where HR needs to be in the driver's seat to be able to push this and to welcome employees from all over and make sure that they create a new organization which is as warm, as well as maintain the culture which is unique to that organization.
Nandita, you raised quite a few points in your commentary up there with respect to gig worker, virtual water coolers, and how organizations need to be thinking about dealing with these different generations who are at work together and make things work. So my next question is to the entire panel, and any one of you can pick this up and respond, or one or two of you can pick this up and respond. The new workforce will comprise of not just millennials, but perennials. That's the latest generation. That's how I define latest generation. How effectively can organizations use technology to understand the uniqueness of this workforce and segment them for effective targeted policies and programs? Any thoughts?
So should I go ahead first?
Anyone?
And the reason is, and I'll be brief about this, is a subject close to my heart. Actually, we talk about millennials and perennials and all of that. The reality is that we all live in the same world today. Yeah, when we grew up, we had 3 cars that were there as options, Ambassador, Fiat, Herald, and then in 1986, Maruti came in and, had a 4th model available. But today, you have 848, channels on our television. You have 8,000 periodicals and newspapers coming out. So the same choice that is available to a youngster at 22 is available to a not so youngster at 52. And I think the model that we have from a people employment or a career option model that we have is defunct today, because it depends on 2 or 3 things: that the boss is the only source of information, that you will work from one organization from beginning to the end. Now, of course, I've worked in this company for almost 29 years, but it's an incredible company and I enjoy it. And each role is a different experience. But the assumption that somebody is going to work in one place from cradle to grave isn't happening. And as you say, our work life is shortening and our lifespan is increasing. So what we need to, create in terms of our personal equity, wealth, brand, or whatever that in that time frame is much less to last us a longer lifetime. So I think we need to reconstruct a career model which is really around flexibility for all of us. Whether you're a 22 or 32 or a 52 or a 62 indeed, and embrace a way that gives you the opportunity to keep a much longer working lifespan.
Any other takes? That's good. Okay. Great. So from transitioning from that to, I think again, I think this is more for Aruna and Dinesh both to respond to. In the services and product industry, respectively, the financial growth resulting is commensurate to employment growth. That's my first part of the question. And my second part of the question to both of you is, are we heading towards an economic dividend or a burden?
Am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay. So I definitely think that I would look at it more as a dividend. So with automation and all of that, people tend to worry about, hey, what is the future of jobs, and will I have a job, and is my job going to be taken away? And it's not just in India. This is a concern everywhere in the world. But really, there's enough now evidence that automation actually doesn't lead to job loss. Okay, it changes the nature of the jobs, but then there is enough potential for everybody, and as long as we focus on many other factors, I do believe at the end there is a positive growth and there's an economic dividend. So, for example, maybe I'm going a little bit directly off your question, but I think it is important when you look at an overall economic growth for the country. It is also important to look at a few other considerations. Okay, number one is digital inclusion. It is one of my favorite topics, and I try to answer that in the Q&A separately. Okay, so if we are not consciously doing something about it, this whole thing today, everything is driven with the help of technology, even for the millennials or the perennials or for the older generation, and if you don't have, which means that if you don't have access to that technology or the infrastructure, you're going to be left behind. So it's absolutely essential for us to make sure that we are building a very digitally inclusive economy, and we all have to take very concrete steps towards that in terms of training, in terms of infrastructure, to creating jobs in this, which will include all sections of society. And the second is that I think we have to keep the planet in mind. I hate to, to see that, we are creating a world where, we're creating more pollution and so on. So if you see today, most organizations will focus intensively on what are their sustainability goals. How much of, carbon emissions are they going to reduce? So if we keep these in mind, I think overall, as a nation, as, globally, you will see a lot of economic dividends there.
Dinesh, any perspectives from a product company perspective?
Yeah, I think I'll just build on what Aruna said because it's so true. I think there are 3 or 4 things that are super important for any economy to grow, and financial growth is actually a precursor to human capital growth. I think and our country is exactly on the right path, which is financial inclusion. So along with data inclusion, as Aruna said, I think financial inclusion is super important to make sure that you can actually have commerce with persons in every part of the country, and they're included in the formal infrastructure. The second is growth of roads and infrastructure, because trade and commerce is greatly facilitated by actually getting products to people, and having a really good road infrastructure is the cornerstone to a great economy. The third is, I think, medical care. We underestimate the expensiveness of the criticality, and making affordable healthcare, available to people, actually increases lifespan and makes sure that the economic life of individuals is higher. It also ensures in some way child employment comes down, because as you are able to have children who grow and survive past the age of 5, as you know, that's a super important milestone in child development, and you're able to have families that are able to create more economic wealth. Things like child employment come down. So it's a big social piece as well. And I think, as Aruna rightly said, we have also announced a clean future strategy in Unilever. And this is really about saying that you have to have growth that is planet friendly. And so whatever we do, economics and a clean planet actually need to go hand in hand, and they're not separated. I think the long-term consequences of having a growth model that is not planet-friendly is devastating. So, and we are seeing, some of the pandemics and some of the weather extremes. Texas actually is having a freezing winter right now, and Athens it's snowing like mad. We have seen all kinds of water, rain and water movements happening in our country as well. This is a function somewhere of an economic model that is not premised on the fact that the planet comes first. And I think Aruna very rightly points it out that our business model must incorporate that.
And I think that brings me to another question for this group up here. And a lot of people are chatting up in their Q&A or a lot of people are asking this question in the Q&A that, hey, these new technologies which are centered around AI, ML, and so on and so forth are going to take over jobs. And I think that's a debate which kind of stays all along. But that being said, the second debate economists are having is all about the human potential. And as we steer through this whole crisis, which has tested our leaders for resilience, agility, and innovation, what are the skills that leaders of tomorrow need to navigate organizations in the post-pandemic world?
Okay, Nandita.
Sorry.
No, go on.
So I think the first one would be courage, because you are moving into a new era, and you need to make some bold decisions. There, of course, are no precedents. So I think the first one would be courage. The ability to handle ambiguity, which is also a trait which leaders of today need, but I think will need more so in the future. And I would say the third one would be empathy. You have to have empathy to be able to connect with the different stakeholders in your organization. And I think that will be, earlier, the left-brained activity or the rational part of it really got a lot of more weightage in the assessment of leaders. But I think that is going to change. And things like empathy and kindness to people, respect for individual is going to come into the forefront.
Okay, Aruna, your 2 or 3 quick
Yeah, in addition to what Nandita said, I agree with everything there. I think 2 points are very important for me. Okay, one is the ability to lead by influence and not due to position or hierarchy. Okay, I think everybody makes up their own mind now, so you have to really have content. Your position doesn't give you any right. Okay, it's your content, it's your ability to really influence people, to to motivate people. That's going to be key. That's one. And second is, especially in a remote or a distributed work environment, leaders should learn not to micromanage. Okay, you need to have the trust in people and let them and believe that, look, if you give somebody a job to do, they will do it. So you should motivate and inspire them and not micromanage.
Both of them very, very pertinent. Dinesh, from your vantage point.
Now, this is going to be a long list, huh? But I think they all come together, and we've got to choose our. I mean, totally agree with all that's been said. I think the two that would be close to my heart is the first is humility. Yeah, and that actually ties into what's been said, that you must be humble, that you don't know the answers to everything, and everybody who works with you has access to almost as much information as you have. Gone are the days when you were the boss and you knew a bunch of things, and therefore you could tell people and you were directing people. Today, information is, my younger daughter used to say, Google is my teacher. Yeah, and that's the kind of availability of information. So just the humility to understand. And as Aruna says, we're in a place because the company has taken the choice and the risk of putting us in that place. And so we should have the humility to know that at the end of the day, we're all going to be retired pensioners from wherever we work. And the second is, the ability to tolerate ambiguity. There is so much of information available today that if you aren't able to structure it and understand, what the future holds out, you could be drowned. So the ability to work in an ambiguous world where you never have full information, and yet you'll have so much of information that you've got to decide what is your true north. Yeah, somewhere in the world, the future is playing itself out now. The choice and the space for us is to find out where is that future happening, and then how do we prepare ourselves for that. So to my top two would be, and not taking away anything else because I agree with everything Nandita and Aruna said, but humility and ambiguity, the ability to tolerance ambiguity.
Fantastic list, I must say, a fantastic list. So that, leads me to a nice segue into some of the audience questions. And we see our audience quite active up here. So I'm just going to take on some of the questions which have kind of been voted up. The first one up here is centered around economic divide. With the increase in digitization, workspace people in the rural area to formal urban workspaces do get good chance to take up formal work. But on the other hand, the digitization has also led to a greater digital divide in country like India. Do you have a model to combat this divide and make internet accessibility equal for all sections of society? I know that this group is an influential group and cannot resolve the problem for the entire country, but any thoughts with respect to how are you looking at reducing the digital divide from your vantage points?
Do you want me to take it first?
Sure.
So I think actually, rather than get worried about the digital divide, which can be a serious concern, I think we should also look at what are the opportunities that technology and the digital situation brings to everybody. So I'll give you one example. Okay, so traditionally we would always take people for let's say contact center work or the technology support work from the cities. Okay? In the last quarter of 2020, we said, why don't we, now that it is available, people can work from there. We hired 500 women from the rural areas who had, there are a lot of people there who are educated but don't have jobs, mainly because they cannot move. Their family situation for women prohibits them or inhibits them from going elsewhere because they also have the homemaker role. So we found 500 women from the rural semi-urban areas to actually work on it, trained them, gave them a laptop, and it works beautifully. I mean, to me, it's an experiment I would love to scale 20 times over, so those are the opportunities. Second is, you look at people who have an entrepreneurial nature. Earlier, for them to sell their services elsewhere would be super hard. think with the technology, with the digital media, it has become possible. So I always look at it, maybe I'm the eternal optimist, but I really do think that it has opened up a lot of opportunities for people. But only thing we have to ensure is that we are providing the infrastructure, which is not entirely up to us, but there's also a role that government and the large companies need to play here. But provided that infrastructure and accessibility is there, which I believe the government is working, it's very strongly towards, I think then it's really, it opens up a lot of possibilities for people.
And you're so right, Aruna, in your response. Think about it as I think about Professor Carol Dweck's work on mindset, the growth mindset. Let's not accept only the negative ways of looking at things, but also think about world of possibilities ahead. I think you're quite apt in responding to that question. The second question, which is voted up by our audience quite a lot, is do you foresee changes in employee evaluation policies due to remote work?
Can I take that? Oh, okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I mean, I can talk for the tech industry, which surely was not just looking at the hours, but also at other measures of productivity. Yeah, but I think in other industries too, the coming to work was a very large part of, the attendance and punctuality was a large part of their evaluation, which today would need a relook. And I think even the goals would need to be qualified better, as much as possible quantifiable goals would work. So I think there is a lot of work here in terms of how are we going to evaluate our employees now and their managers? How are we going to, more importantly, how are we going to evaluate the management first in creating a trust workplace, in having the ability to manage a remote workforce, as well as to be able to create employee experiences for them, because this is not just an HR department job. Every manager is an HR or a people manager. So I think all of those would need to come in, because for the first time, I think organizations will now realize that they would need to make management more accountable to employee experiences. And therefore, a lot of this would get into their evaluation. So I'm sure there is work in progress, because, the year closes soon enough, at least in India. But for the next year, I'm sure there would be metrics which would get aligned to the new business as usual, or the new normal.
So adding up equal accountability at a leadership level, and not just at an individual employee level, is your key message up there. And I think a lot of those leadership models, whether you call it a servant leader or a resilient leadership, I think all of that will get tested out in times ahead. So the next question, which is voted up by our audience, is centered around workplace creates an environment for consistent learning. Can technology replace this form of learning? How effective has it been at an organizational level? And Dinesh, I think your workforce is spread across in field, in manufacturing units, as well as in the corporate offices too. So your quick thoughts on that question.
So I think firstly, it's a really good question, as indeed all of these or many of these are. I think there are two parts to it. For me, learning is not a learning program. So I think 70% of the learning, we believe in the 70-20-10 rule, which is 70% of the learning happens on the job. 20% happens through coaching, mentoring, and 10% happens through formal learning. So I think the first assumption we should make is that learning happens by the kind of job that you do. And therefore moving from one job to the other is a good way of building your skill set and building the kind of abilities that you have. And that learning could be about doing different jobs and different parts of the business and different locations. I've worked outside. I had the privilege of working outside India, and I find that working in a large company, working in a small company, working in a culture that's very different to ours. All of this, you could do the same job in a very different country and find yourself completely stretched. So I think, firstly, we must look at the totality of learning when we talk about learning. The second is technology gives us the ability and the space to allow people to learn when they want to learn. Yeah, otherwise what happens is the model in the past was you have to come into a classroom and then everybody has to learn 9 to 5, and then you go home and have a dinner or whatever it is. You go to a training center and then spend some time bonding with everybody else. There is a place for that, no doubt, because you cannot replace the space of people networking, talking to each other, and having that human connection. But I think it gives people the space to actually learn on their own time. So, for example, when we talk of our sales force or an extended sales force, a distributed sales force, you have programs that are available for them on their phone. Yeah. So when they travel, in a bus or on a train up country, they can use that time to just log into a very quick kind of a module, and the module has to become much shorter, much smaller. Attention spans have to be managed, so it's got to be much more engaging. So I think the challenge for us is really how do we make our learning much more engaging and interactive, and probably gamify it and have it in short bites, like a YouTube video or an Instagram or a TikTok, where actually you see the duration of the video is very small. Yeah, and that's why people are hooked onto it or watch it, because it's not a half an hour or 1 hour kind of a program. So the question is, can you have a 1 point lesson? Can you have a 1 minute lesson? Can you have a 1 minute video that gives you 1 point per day? Technology gives you the space to allow people to see it when they like it and they're not forced to do it. And it allows you to use different media. You can use video, audio, gamification, data into it as well, interaction. So I think there's a huge opportunity to empower our learning, and not forget that learning is still in this format about 10% of your total learning experience.
Awesome. And certainly you underscore some of those aspects of bite-sized learning and micro coaching as key trends emerging in the space of learning as we progress from here.
Because some amazing stuff has been done in schools. I happened to look at some of the work which my granddaughter was doing, and the animation and the learning style for children. I mean, really amazing work done in such a quick period of time. So I think it's just going to take off now. I mean, the online learning is
Right.
really going to get only better.
Right. And
sorry, Nandita, that's a super point. Yeah? The reality is the degree of difficulty of keeping the attention span of a 5-year-old. Yeah. It's 10 times more than a 50-year-old. Yeah. So teachers have to be the most creative, and the most thoughtful on how to deliver learning to a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and so on. And I think that's a super point that, corporations and organizations can learn from how teachers actually manage a virtual classroom, which is probably the most challenging job for a primary school teacher.
Yeah, and I think both of you have very nicely responded to another question, which was again voted quite up in the list of questions, was how are organizations going to take advantage of AI and ML in expediting this growth, which is ahead of us. So I think in some way you responded to that. My final question from the group of audience up here is, and the question is, for women in the workplace, what are changes in the HR policy you recommend all companies must adapt in the near future?
I don't know if we need specifically women policies, okay, but that's just me. So I think you need parent policies, because you somehow silo women when you say that she's the caretaker of children. Whereas if you have policies for parents, then the father also can take equal part of the share of raising the kids. I remember in my previous organization when I introduced work from home for women with children below the age of 5. The women walked into my room and said, "How could you do this? I mean, you are now reinforcing that this is our job. Whereas, you instead give it to the whole organization so that husbands can stay at home for some days to look after the children." And absolutely rightly so. But of course, there are some which are very specific, like, maternity and kind of stuff. But again, the introduction of paternity is a wonderful thing, because, it again gives the woman a chance to get back to work while, the transition is made with the little baby. So I would go in for life cycle policies for employees, which say that, when you have children, below a certain age, certain kind of policies which, allow you to sort of go over the hump of, the imbalance between your time at work and space. And much as we would like to believe that life gets better if you're working from home, I think a lot of women and men would agree that really they need to get out to the workplace and come to an office, because it seems endless to manage both the home and the workplace. So yes, I think organizations will work at such policies, especially the parenting ones, to ensure that their workforce continues on and does not get off. And today's statistics do say that there are fewer number of women who are exiting out due to childbirth and child rearing than earlier.
Yeah, you're so right, Nandita. And our sports personalities and some of our film actors and so on and so forth are truly setting up an example by taking on those paternity leaves to prove that point that hey, we are equal in this responsibility to take that forward. So with that, I think I need to close this fascinating conversation because it's time. And all I would say is that this conversation I hope to the audience has provided some insights of the ongoing debate regarding the future centered around interplay of technological innovation and creative destruction. For India, this debate is no different due to our scope and scale. Like many of you and your curious questions, which I've seen up here in the Q&A box, I am taking away a lot of capabilities which these leaders have guided us on. And the 6 of them I made a note of: courage, empathy, influence, trust, humility, dealing with ambiguity as my key takeaways from these sessions on the capabilities which we need to develop within ourselves to forge forward in this world of future work and lead this country to its new century. And as Vidapa said, this is an Indian century for us to lead to. So I would again, like the opening, would like to close with a quote, this time from a management guru, my favorite, Peter Drucker, who said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic." And my only big hope is that we all shed away those orthodoxies and shed away that logic of yesterday and move forward with times. With that, a big namaste to all my audiences and my fellow panel members for this stimulating conversation this Sunday morning. Back to Shripriya.
Thank you all very much for that very dynamic and enriching discussion. I think it was very insightful and inspiring. We have a lot to take away from today. On behalf of the entire India Conference team, please allow me to express my heartfelt gratitude to all our esteemed panelists. Thank you for your time and for sharing with us your valuable insights about the future of workforce in India. And of course, our sincere thanks to our audience spanning India, the US, and elsewhere across the globe. Thank you for tuning in and participating so actively through your thought-provoking questions. Also, as a reminder to everyone, we have a host of exciting events planned for day 3 of the conference. The next session is a keynote by Rohini Nilekani and Mona Sinha on building the Indian philanthropic sector. The session is at 7:30 p.m. India time today and 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Please do visit our website, indiaconference.com, for further information. Once again, a big thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.